Greetings, everybody. I know it's been a hot minute since I've made a video. The short version is I've just been busy. Not really much in the way of excuses other than I've just been busy. I've been working quite a bit, um, and I also really haven't had much in the way of privacy since I'm in the process of actually securing a space all to myself, kind of like an office where I could potentially set up better camera equipment. So that'll be forthcoming. Um, with that being said, it's not that I haven't tried to make videos. It's just when you review the content and you review the presentation, um, it doesn't quite turn out the way you want it to. And sometimes what I've noticed about other YouTube contenters or people who put themselves out there like this is they're rather quick and to the point, and they're in and they're out, and I seem to lack that capacity. The last video I tried to make, I completed the video, I produced it, I just didn't publish it because it went on much longer than I thought was necessary. Um, I was inspired by two videos I came across. One was a bit of a documentary on Allison Mack and her involvement with Nexium or Nexus or whatever it was. And in the documentary, they talk about how a concept of neurolinguistical hypnotism was used to manipulate people, so on and so forth. Some compared it to Scientology and whatnot. Um, but I found the manipulation interesting, and I also found the documentary interesting because in my early 20s, I was a big fan of Smallville, which, for the uninitiated, was basically the pre-Superman story of Clark Kent. I enjoyed it, and if anybody's interested, I could make a quick video summarizing Smallville. But with that being said, I found that interesting, and then of course YouTube does this thing where it's like, hey, if you're interested in that, you might like this. And I recently discovered a young woman named Sydney Watson. I discovered her through different means, but my point being is she did a video where she was talking about the concept of people within society attempting to normalize the concept of pedophilia, up to and including changing the label from pedophile to minor attracted person. So I made a video before I educated myself, and it didn't come out the way that I wanted it to. So I did a little bit of research, and I do mean a very little bit of research, because I wanted to understand exactly what they were talking about and why there might be people out there who are trying to normalize this behavior. So according to several definitions, several psychological definitions, several explanations of the concept and or condition, it is people. It's not gender specific. It is people who have a sexual interest and a sexual attraction towards prepubescent children. So in order to satisfy the requirements to be a pedophile, the child in question has to be of such an age where they're not yet developing into a young woman or a young man, where their body still represents that of a juvenile, their body still represents that of a child. So for women, there would be no hint of a bosom. For men, there would be no hint of I guess testosterone, no hint of body hair, facial hair, whatever would make a male prepubescent and a woman prepubescent, because then you start to get into those murky areas when young men and women are 15, 16. They're not considered legally an adult, but for all intents and purposes they look like one. Apparently that has absolutely nothing to do with it. So high school age children who are starting to reach adult level appearances, adult level height, adult level builds, all that stuff, that has nothing to do with it. And apparently it has a lot less to do with even middle school or junior high age kids who are somewhere in between. It has everything to do with kids of an elementary school age and nature, uh, as far as prepubescent goes. So, obviously, as you can imagine, it's not exactly something I approve of, because according to the definition, it involves a sexual attraction. Now, it goes a little bit further as to whether or not people act on it, whether people are private about it, in which case, that brings me to a different topic. And part of what Sydney was talking about was the way I interpret it. I don't want to put words into Sydney's mouth. So we as a society, as a free society, as the society of America, and as far as I'm concerned, all societies across the globe, when we come together and we form a society, we also bring forth the concept and the capacity to determine what is and what is not appropriate. Now, I could mess around and go super deep, like when Constantine commissioned the Council of Nicaea. That was a group or a society of quote-unquote religious scholars who were specific to the new religion of Christianity, who determined what gospels were and what gospels were not appropriate to go into the modern day Bible. But I digress. So as a society, whether here locally in the United States or elsewhere, we have the physical capacity to determine what we approve of and what we disapprove of, what we condone and what we do not condone. As of recently, for the most part, we have always, as a society, frowned upon or disapproved of pedophilia in its current incarnation, which is a sexual attraction towards prepubescent children, one that people wish to act upon. And what Sydney was trying to get at was there's a fringe group, whether they're trying to attach themselves to the rainbow banner of the LGBT community or whether they're trying to create their own banner. They're trying to change the labeling to minor attracted persons, meaning that it's a sexual condition or it's a sexual preference, just like bisexuality, homosexuality, etc. And they're attempting to normalize it. They're attempting to make it socially acceptable for these people. I guess the best way to put it is, I guess, to feel comfortable coming out of the closet and to feel comfortable with themselves and to basically embrace the world openly, like, hey, my name is so-and-so and I get off on children. So my understanding is what Sydney was getting at is how there's a group of people who are attempting to normalize this and make it as mainstream as homosexuality and bisexuality and whatnot. And if that was her point, then I understand it. Look, if you disagree, by all means, you know my thought process. Get involved. Let's have a conversation. And I know this isn't quite as sarcastic as I had promised moving forward. I promise I will try to be more sarcastic, but I felt this was worth noting because I'm trying to think of the most neutral way to propose it, but I just can't. You're talking about prepubescent children whose minds are way underdeveloped. Their concept of right and wrong is still in development. Their ability to make decisions is still in development. And specifically what we're talking about is their ability to make decisions of a sexually intimate nature. And we're also talking about prepubescent children. So these are children who have yet to reach the age where young women have periods and are now capable of reproducing, or young boys are now producing ejaculate, so now they're able to reproduce. So specifically what the condition calls for is a sexual attraction towards children who have yet to reach the age where their body is ready to procreate. And from a psychological perspective, as far as what's going on in a child's brain like that, yeah, I think it's wrong. I think it's a violation of innocence. I think I personally think it's wrong. If you disagree, by all means. Should we normalize this behavior? No. Should we mainstream this behavior? Absolutely not. I know as a society we have the capacity to do so, and if that's what Sydney Watson was getting at, then I completely agree. We should not be normalizing this kind of behavior. We should not be even entertaining it. I don't find it even remotely acceptable to put it in the realm of a sexual preference, all right, for all kinds of reasons. You know, it, if you're somebody out there who wants me to elaborate on why, then perhaps maybe you need to do a deeper dive into your own self and find out, you know, why exactly you want me to do a deeper dive into why this is not acceptable behavior. But with that being said, that's where I stand on the subject, and that's as something I've talked about numerous times before. I'm a big fan of you doing you. All right, I'm a big fan of what you do in the privacy of your own home, you know, whatever. Especially if there's the attempt to be discreet, if there's the attempt to be private. If you're somebody who does suffer from this affliction where you are attracted to minor people, if you're attracted to young children, but it's something that you keep in the closet, the way I look at it is, if you recognize it as a condition, if you recognize it as a compulsion, and you're attempting to deal with it as a compulsion, again, you do you. Part of the reason this hits home for me is when I was in the service, a gentleman I had served with, I'm not going to give any names because I'm not going to defame anybody's character, but a gentleman I was in the service with, he was in a rank specifically, and he was in a position specifically where he had authority. He had a specific level of authority and responsibility where a certain level of behavior was expected of him. And then apparently, after he and I separated and we were no longer working together, he was accused and convicted of lewd, pedophilic behavior, which in my mind indicates that there is, you know, something wrong. Instead of the elevator going straight up and down, the elevator zigzags. And this is a man who, militarily speaking, was supposed to be put in charge of, among other things, individuals and their lives. So that's why it hits home for me. Not to mention, I also have children. And I cannot understand the concept of trying to normalize behavior that has been considered deviant for so long. And why we're attempting to normalize the sexuality of young children. And, you know, this goes on to that whole Netflix special with cuties and whatnot. I think there's a certain age where we as a society have determined that children are off limits. Children of a certain age are off limits because we should preserve their innocence, we should preserve their youth, allow them to grow up, you know, with their innocence preserved, so that they can reach a certain age where they can absorb information through teaching, they can absorb information through experience, and then at an age that we've deemed appropriate as a society, they can start to make their own decisions to include that of a sexual nature. If you disagree, if you have a completely different viewpoint on the subject, by all means, go ahead, get involved, leave a comment. Oh my God, I don't care. But please, the only way we can try to understand each other is if we communicate with one another. But until that day happens, that's all I got. Later.